Clive, thank you very much indeed for accepting my invitation to this podcast. Now, one of the reasons I've invited you is that you've had multiple careers and each of them has been really interesting. I know, and I'd like you to talk about how you began, but I know that you were once a junior leader in the armed forces. You much later were part of the fire service and had a very senior role there. I think we first met when you were president of the rowing club, and your leadership there was quite transformative and very empowering in terms of promoting the club and what it does and the standards within the club. On retirement, your knowledge of fire meant that you became an expert on tall buildings and give advice. But now you're supporting the next generation in a corporate way, much as you did with the rowing club, because you're now a man who's principally involved in talent acquisition. And so you've held many leadership positions, without doubt have had many leaders in your time, and you've had multiple careers. I'm just interested in your reflection on that. Is it a career path that you chose? Did it just happen? How did you find yourself on that path?
Well, I think the first thing you've described, Tim, is I'm old. That's all I've achieved there is I've actually sort of got old. I podcast, this is new to me, so apologies to everyone if I ramble a bit. I'm suffering a bit of imposter syndrome here. That's introduction I don't particularly recognise. Have I got anything to say that someone would like to listen to? Yeah, we'll find out, I guess. Did I plan it? In the words of Mike Tyson, no, the plan falls apart, doesn't it? In warfare, you can have all the plans you like if it suddenly arrives. I didn't plan my career. I just sort of fell into it like a lot of us do. I was inspired, must have been, as a youngster. I was always going to be a soldier. Where did that come from? Just inbred, patriotism, monarchy, love of country, love of drama, maybe. Don't know. So I just fell into being a soldier. It wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. Came out with the intent to be a policeman.
Mm-hmm.
Failed. That I then ended up with a choice to be a fireman or a policeman, firefighter now, of course, and made the choice to go into firefighting. Never really regretted that. 30 years in there, someone's quoted as, if you love it, it's not work. Never really felt like work. It was just like, wow. And and then, but you missed one bit out. I worked in the public utilities for doing business continuity and safety and risk management. And wow, one of the things in the emergency blue light service is you feel that you are important, essential to society. Everyone's relying on you, but utilities, you could do without a fire service, but without water, 3 days, 3 hours maybe for a lot of places. So that was quite humbling and increased my awareness about the seriousness of planning and systems engineering. The people that not only thought of, built and maintained the water system, and how well it's been shown recently, isn't it, with crypto. Our water company is fighting crypto constantly, daily, and all the skills and engineering that goes into that is remarkable, and courage, isn't it? And you imagine trying to build a reservoir or build a dam now. Someone says, that's what we need to do to provide clean water to everyone and get on and do it. That's real leadership, isn't it? Yeah.
And there's an interesting theme here. Now, I may be wrong, but I mean, if you take the uniform services, starting with the armed services, then you talked about police and then, of course, fire service and, of course, utilities. And they're all pretty structured organizations. They tend to be fairly traditional type organizations. Is there something about that that's particularly appealing to you? Is that Is that a coincidence?
No, it's a strange one, isn't it? Perhaps you can answer this for me, Tim, because you don't get anyone who's more sort of out of the box and innovative than me. It's like, well, it's a bit weird. Who knows why we're attracted to certain things? But I definitely don't like being constrained. I definitely want to do things better and differently, and will challenge the status quo. So, and I'm not very authoritarian. Interestingly, I love challenge and debate and correction. So why? How did I end up in uniforms? I don't know. Junior leadership. The British Army did it to me without me knowing. I was 16 after all, which is just like what's a 16-year-old doing? There's sort of moral, ethical questions there, aren't they? But I was getting moulded, and I didn't know I was getting moulded. So they created us. I'm still in touch with a lot of those 16-year-olds that I join with, and we get us together, and we're exactly the same. We're created, moulded. We react in the same way initially. We've all grown and got that experience, but we still inherently are triggered by the same sort of stuff. Interestingly, and this is sort of quite dramatic straight off, too many are dying early
All
of
right.
these 16-year-olds. We're all getting to their 60s, and there's like, out of less than 30 of us, there's probably 20% dying at 60. So
And
what's going on there?
do you think that may be a reflection of the health and lifestyle that people used to
Yeah,
have
yeah, without doubt.
then? Clearly, that carries forward.
Yeah, yeah, without doubt. The challenges, the mental health challenges. I mean, you didn't have mental health challenges in the army of the 70s and 80s. That wasn't the brutality of junior leaders
Mm.
college to make you this junior leader was like quite shocking but effective when you look back on it. But yeah, culture, health, lifestyle, alcohol, smoking, charging. Soldiers tend to get stuck in and solve it, and will put themselves in a harm's way, I guess, with no concern for themselves. Bad backs. You know,
Uh,
headache. Deafness. All this sort of thing is like no
There's a
lack of
tendency,
self care. Definitely.
there's a tendency sometimes to be nostalgic about those things, and whilst I don't want this podcast to be political, we're speaking at a time where recently the idea of some form of national service has been mooted again. Um, and I think that's really interesting that you talked about patriotism for country, and clearly your roles have reflected a degree of service for the country. And I'm wondering how you look back on those things. Is it with nostalgia? Is it with growth? Do you distance yourself from that, or how do you reflect on it?
Yeah, you can't take it out of you. Regiment and soldier is still there. I think young people. That's why young people will fight wars. I'm interested. Ukrainians made a deliberate attempt not to recruit young people because they want their young people to have a life, see them as a future. What a great model! Let's
Mm,
get these 50-year-olds fighting wars, and then they should come to an end pretty quickly, wouldn't they? With my hips, I'd never be able to fight a war, sort of thing.
mm,
Um, I don't mean to diminish the horrors going on, but that's quite a radical thing to have done for a society, isn't it? To say, let's save our under 27s, I think it is. I think they might have to drop it because it's so horrible. I don't see how we can't be political. National service is held with some great nostalgia. It produced, how many comedians and artists did
mm,
it produce? I mean, everyone sort of hated it, but it's so formative at the
mm,
time. Um, I understand the British Army has changed. It's for want of simplifying it, it's a lot less shouty now.
mm.
It's a lot less drive through. Whether that makes you a good army or not, I wonder. But we won't ever know, will we? But building some consideration for others is never a bad thing.
Hmm.
You know, we were put in positions where we had to look after each other and make sure the other person was okay instead of yourself and endless worrying about yourself. That's never a bad thing, is it? Can you produce that outside of national service? I'm not sure. And the beauty of the British Army or the armed forces, the objectives are really clear.
Hmm.
If you want something done, tell the serviceman, give him clear directions, and he'd do it. And he'd get really, she as well, of course, will get really distressed when they're not given. They will do as they're told and get it done with autonomy and well, aggression, of course, and energy, and they make something happen. But if you instruct them wrong, if you wanted to get political, one of my particular distresses, if you like, is I'd like to find out who sent the parachute regiment to police a civil rights march
Hmm.
in Londonderry. I mean, the paras are absolutely brilliant shock troops. If you've ever worked with a parachute regiment, boy, you're lucky. If I'm in a fight on the battlefield, that's who you want to be around. Would I want them to be police a civil rights march and expect a different outcome than if it was battlefield? I'm not sure.
That's really interesting. I'm aware, and some of the audience may be aware, of Simon Sinek, who has very popular. Not all of his ideas are original, but even those ideas that are not original, he's a great advocate for them. And one of the things he talks about is working with Navy SEALs. And he comes up with this lovely phrase: who would you trust with your life? Who would you trust with your wife? Because
Yeah,
fundamentally, trust is the most important thing, more important than competence. And therefore, the person that you would trust with your life and the person that you would trust with your wife is the person with whom you would go through life. And I have to say, I reflect on that and think of my army buddies, and I can't say that I would trust them with my partner, but I would certainly trust them on the battlefield. So I think that's quite interesting, this idea of trust and autonomy and boundaries and leadership. It's quite fuzzy. I don't think there's a clear. I think if you have too strong a boundaries, you stifle stuff. But I absolutely agree with what you say about if the boundaries are there, the message is there, the clarity is there, then the execution will be there. And I think
yeah,
this thing about trust is quite interesting.
yeah. And I think we might have broken new ground here, Tim. I think we've come up with a new thought here. So we're situational leadership. People will rise to leadership in a situation. So the most surprising people have had, would not aspire to be leader, and then suddenly you get a COVID experience or a terrorist attack or a civil accident, and ping, these people in that situation become remarkable leaders. I think we've just stumbled across situational trust.
Hmm.
You know, there's situational trust. There's certain situations where your trust can be put in the hands of someone absolutely completely, and there's certain situations where it can't. And then that strikes me to where somewhere I'd like this conversation to go is we're back into philosophy
Hmm.
there, which I don't think we use enough of. A lot of the philosophers spent an awful lot of time solving our problems, and then we ignore them. And the one I'm thinking of is something morals,
Hmm.
situational morals,
Hmm.
reactive moral, i.e. I
Aristotle and
think.
Plato did quite a lot of work on ethics and morals, and
So
uh,
is it right if you steal to feed your family? So stealing is
well, that,
wrong.
that then is
Feeding
counter
your family is right.
pastoral imperative and things like that. Yeah, really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, so that's philosophy for you. Where it's a bit like, and then it connects them. The thing I'm really excited about, and I'm not well educated. I was poorly educated. No one's fault, probably mine. Low aspirations, wanted to join the army from 14, went to a comprehensive school, which was brilliant, with brilliant, charismatic teachers that I regret I didn't make the most of, but I was young. And so I'm not well educated. So I keep finding surprising stuff that well educated people are like, "What, you want to, yeah, really? You didn't know that?" And and I look at, some of Einstein's work, theory of relativity. Well, that's relative morals. That's what it must be. Yeah, So if you're on the train moving at speed, you don't feel like you're at speed. If you're on the platform with the train going past you, but the same thing is happening. The train is going at the same speed, but your relative circumstances means it feels completely different, and that is relative morality, isn't it? And
I'm going to pick up on that because I think there's an interesting theme that we can explore there. But I should correct myself because anyone who does know the philosophers know it's not Cantor, it's Immanuel Kant that I was
yeah,
referring to earlier. But here's a really interesting one, borderline political. When we look at the current post office scandal, and there have been plenty of scandals before then that we could look at in terms of Windrush, Blood, Enron, there are
yeah,
just so many scandals. And I don't think, for example, Paula Venables comes out of this as being a great leader. And I'm not necessarily going to expand upon that because I think that's probably quite a cheap shot. But what I do think is really interesting is when we talk about systems and situations, because I do sit there and think, were I in her shoes, what would I do? And I think it's really easy to say, well, of course, I would have done things differently. But of course, there is that situational morals, there's a situational context. And we often say, for example, and I've been a sportsman and I know that you are as well, if we look at some of the Olympics, we sit there and go, well, actually, we can fight apartheid by actually going to the games and persuading people otherwise is an argument that you make change by being part of the group. You don't necessarily make change by being absent from the group. And I find that interesting. This is the context of when we find ourselves in a situation that we think isn't right. To what extent do we step up? To what extent do we blow a whistle? To what extent do we bide our time and patiently wait? I think that's quite challenging.
I would. There's so many things buzzing through me, and I don't want to lose the point. So I really do want to talk about the post office. I did a bit more research on there. I I think the blow your whistle. There's a great paper out on the NHS. They did most of the NHS problems have been solved. It's just applying those problems. And one of them was chopping off the wrong legs, sort of thing. And someone in the room knew that was the wrong leg. And what they found was that the length, depending on your juniorness, you might say, are we sure we've got the right leg? And you'll say it once, you'll get closed down, you'll say it once. Some other people will say it twice, but no one is going to say it more than twice. So you need the hierarchy, if you like. A consultant who's not prepared to listen chops the wrong leg off. Is manifestation of that culture. I think the systems. Let's go for the systems. Sadly, and this is in communication and stuff. This is what I was looking at. What are we going to talk about? Productivity and communications. And I think the British system of doing business is bust.
Mm-hmm.
I think the post office is the indicator. I don't think it's alone. If you search, don't get me started on the Malik, is it the guy who? So there's a whole raft of people who were stuck in prison, unsafe
Conviction.
conviction. They stuck moral people, so they wouldn't accept it, so they get no probation. So they stay in longer than they should have done anyway. And then he's finally listened to and he's vindicated and he's let out. And then when he's let out, the system is set up that he can't claim compensation anymore because you have to be innocent. proven innocent.
Beyond
Whereas
all
when you're
reasonable
released
doubt.
from prison, you're only unsafe conviction. So he has to go through it all. So he spent 17 to 20 years in jail, absolutely stitched up by everyone. And then when he comes out, he's stitched up by the system. And you can add tainted blood. You can add this to football stadium disasters, rail, all these sort of things that, tainted blood. 1986, a journalist was going to Private Eye at the time. This is going on. The system of our boards, the way our boards work, non-executive directors, remuneration committees, all this sort of stuff. Thames Water, 17 billion, am I right there? 17 billion in the red, yet they're audited every year. So there's a poacher gamekeeper thing going on all the time, isn't it? So we've got, I don't know, youth clubs closing for the want of 50 grand, and that allows to go on. So that board thing, where the sort of, I'm very objective. I like to get into the facts and really so the sort of things that would ring bells with me with the Paula Venables sort of arena, if you like, is that she's a CEO of a massive company in trouble. Yeah, you'd think that's a 24/7 job, wouldn't you? You would really think that takes all your energy, all your passion, all I don't know how she would have done it for so long if she was good at it. And yet she had a secondary career as a lay preacher. Now, most people would think, well, okay, that's a hobby, fair enough. She nearly got the Bishopric of London. Okay, that's third. That's Archbishop of Canterbury, Archbishop of York, Bishop of London. I had a quick surf round, 46 million a year, operating. Yeah. Yeah. 630 million in assets and stuff. No, so that's not a small sort of.
But we increasingly live in a world that extols the virtue of leadership, and pretty much every course, it's be a better leader. And there is evidence to suggest that people like to be led, and yet you yourself have cited half a dozen cases where leadership is seen to be broken. And of course, those are the cases above the waterline. I suspect there are quite a few below the waterline we don't see. What's your prognosis? What have we got wrong?
I think is we don't welcome challenges. One of the best, I should remember what it is. One of the best things in incident management and business continuity is you have a doomsayer in the team.
Mm-hmm.
So when everyone's going, oh yeah, we'll just turn on the backup generators. What if the backup generators are out of fuel? Oh, shut up, Clive. And you have someone that is constantly challenging the norm. And I don't think, going back to trust as well, the mavericks. I'm pretty sure Tim and I think everyone that knows me is I'll blow the whistle, no matter how much loyalty and I think mavericks are kept out because they're seen as dangerous. So you have this business of and leadership is absolute power corrupts absolutely. So again, let's use the post office scandal as a great example. Is you've got lots and lots of high-powered, talented people that would have known it's absolutely wrong, and they're cajoled into knowing, to back in the organisation. And you can say that about the famous analogy of if all the train drivers in Nazi Germany stopped driving the trains, then you wouldn't have had a Holocaust sort of thing. Yeah, all those train drivers were pretty hard-working, normal, caring people. And we find ourselves with the post office. I love the things that the real eyebrow-raising moment is that the lawyer for the post office, who will have no doubt written many a performance appraisal for lots of people and would have ruined a few careers in his time on his Scrabble to the top. What we know is he never write them on a computer because he can't open a file. Uh, the top legal advisor couldn't open or save a document, and he thought that's a viable excuse that everyone should accept. I'd be saying, well, let's forget about the dubious morals here and everything. Let's go straight for competence. How on earth are you competent to run a business if you can't open a file?
But here's an interesting thing. You yourself now are quite active in talent acquisition and talent support, and I'd love for you to expand upon that. If I lift a phrase from Simon Sinek, but it's quite a zeitgeist thing at the moment. A lot of people are saying it is, recruit for attitude, train for skill. The idea that the attitude is actually more important than perhaps the technical competence, because we can train technical competence. And of course, when we talk about recruiting for attitude, there's almost an implication here that attitude is compliance, passion, agreement, loyalty, trust. And because the attitude we don't want to recruit is maverick, difficult, naysayer, etc. Since you're actually in the thick of it, how does talent acquisition work in your organization, or what do you see between the difference between what you're doing now and, because of your length of experience, what you've seen in the past?
Well, I think the jersey. We made the mistake. And not being a jerseyman and only coming here from 2002. I think one of the things that we made the mistake of not accepting jerseys different.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, the fire service did and was dramatically so. What a great organisation equipped to deal with risks of the level of any mainland service, yet with the workforce, quarter of not even a tenth of the size. So they had to adapt and overcome that, and that's because it's in Jersey. I don't think we apply that enough. Mm-hmm. That thinking in saying, look, we are different. Let's accept we are different and approach it. And one of the things we're looking at in talent is we are terrible at the runners up.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have is that we're having a selection process for 10 people who are equally great, and there's and only one can get that role, and so you end up with 9 disgruntled, damaged, demotivated people. Because we don't plan, we know that's going to happen. So, yet we rarely have. I don't say because I don't work across the entire public service, and I'm only talking about experiments. So let's say lots of people are doing this, but a lot aren't. So you'll have 9 people that you knew when you started out on this process that 9 people are going to be hurt. And the one person that you put all your eggs in the basket in may not work out, or may move on. And yet Einstein again. You keep doing the same thing in the same way and expect a different result, where you're clearly insane. So we need to be better at nurturing the people that don't make it. So we need to have a better system of hierarchy, a fairer wage structure, maybe. There's a big difference between the people who make it and the people who don't. It's not. It's meant to be 2.5%, isn't it? But it tends to.
Your phrase there, the people that make it, the people that don't, make it very much about the person rather than the system or the context or the environment. And I think, it's a function of the Western economy that we're quite individualistic. If you're looking in Japan or China, they take a very different approach to success, and they don't necessarily personify it or even identify with it. Might do with failure. There's a big honor thing. But to what extent do you think it's helpful to identify with success and push yourself forward and use your personality as a force for good? And to what extent is it actually more useful to be systemic, collaborative, cooperative?
Yeah.
Where do you find?
I agree with you. I think the main tenet of what we're recognising is that not everyone is talent, and let's accept
Mm.
But capable, the talent and the capable, spent quite a long time on finding the right words, because competence is a difficult one, because the synonym is incompetence, which is
Mm.
like, who are you calling incompetent? Yeah, talent. There is a difference between talent and capability, and the capable, and you cannot have an organisation without really capable,
Mm.
reliable people who need rewarding and nurturing and feeling happy about them things. And but you do need talent as well. And one of the more painful conversations is probably telling someone that, or giving them the self awareness that they're not talent. And how do you do that? What makes talent and what is
How do you
also,
define talent in that context? Because if you're saying talent isn't necessarily competence, okay, what is talent? What is that secret
yeah, I,
ingredient?
I've chunked away at that. The one of the ones, and I heard this year, we always think we come up with it, but when I was playing rugby, which I loved and adored, I was capable. I was never going to win you the match. I would fall in front of people occasionally, win the ball occasionally, and they used to call that, or in my circle, was you had piano movers and piano players, and I was a piano mover. And
Mhm.
and you needed to have three piano players in your team to win. You could have a team of piano movers that would stop you losing, but you wouldn't be able to win. And that was ages ago, and that's a good sum up, isn't it, of between the capable and the talented. I've done some work on it. I pulled the document up. I asked. Guess what I asked? The difference between talent and capability. And I also did a load of research and things. So the use of AI, I think it should be a requirement where you go to AI first, but you keep your humanity and you don't take it as right. You then say, "Oh, that's good boundaries for research," and then you take it further. That's my way of using it anyway. But how do you define talent and capability? Innate ability is a natural attribute. Talented employees have a high potential for specific skills and tasks, exhibiting creativity, innovation, and quick learning. I think that's. I think the quick learning. I think when you and I grew up to be good, you had to learn stuff and remember it and recall it and deliver it accurately. Now things change so quickly. The person who learns something is difficult, because it's hard to get them out of that habit of doing stuff. So I think that's a thing there. And then the capability is practical application of the skills and the ability to perform the task effectively, and demonstrate strong performance through experience, training, and consistency, and they deliver results. So we not it's not a good and bad thing, is it? It's not like, oh, capable. It's a bit like introvert, extrovert. Introverts sort of like boring, But introverts, it's great, isn't it? It's a brilliant thing. But yeah, capable and talent is not good and bad.
Mm.
An organisation which doesn't have lots and lots of capable people in there will not win games. You know,
I recognized some of this in a podcast that I was listening to, and it was a chap who was early in HR with LinkedIn when LinkedIn was circa 250 odd people. And he made the observation that he said, well, we quickly realized that nobody was going to stay much more than 3 years. People were going to come in, make an impact, and exit. And therefore, in terms of recruitment and talent acquisition, there was no point in a long-term growth strategy. They're not going to be here long enough. And therefore, the recruitment was actually based on speed of learning, not depth of knowledge, speed of learning. Okay. And of course, with AI, depth of knowledge possibly now is less valued because, you could have a PhD and have all the information in your head, and your counterpart has a keyboard and has access to even more information than you have as a PhD. So I think it's really interesting what has been a knowledge economy. I don't think the knowledge economy is going to survive much longer. I think it's going to change because that depth of knowledge now is so easily accessible by everybody. And I wonder how that reflects on talent acquisition.
yeah. Well, the trouble we all have is that we acquire and promote in our own image, don't we? So obviously, I'm more likely to favour, a sort of dynamic, get the job done type character, personality, someone who's going to challenge authority, because I think I think I'm not actually. I don't think I'm, but I think we naturally go for our organisations will naturally promote and employ images of themselves, and of course, so in the world of talent, you're going to promote and recruit images of the talent team as well. So somehow we've got to learn to yeah, I really love those exercises. The blue hat, brown hat, green hat, white hat, where you have to think like that. I think that's a real powerful thing. I came from, so the thing they moulded me within the junior leaders regiment was Adair's functional leadership. We didn't know that we were doing it, but didn't. It would have been nice actually if they'd given us the background behind it. But functional leadership is basically you're given a list, and if you complete that list, you're a good leader, and it works. It really does. Yeah, it really works. What? So if you've got someone who you say they've got weak or ineffective leadership capabilities, you should say to them, it's a hierarchy. That's another reason it works. It's no hopping around or choosing what you do or anything. Start from the top, work to the bottom, and you will have effective leadership results. Might not be held up as the best leader, but you'll be capable. You'll be a capable, maybe not a talented leader. You'll be a capable leader. Yeah, and that's no bad thing, is it? Lots of people doing that. So, I lost myself a bit there, Tim. Where were we?
Well, let's just pick that and run with it as a theme. I mean, simplistically, we can turn around and say, are leaders born or made? But I think we're already in one particular direction here when we recognize the value of leadership, training and development, personal growth. So I think all of this suggests that, some people may have an innate talent for leadership, but absolutely you can improve upon it with experience, with training, with support, and with guidance. But is that actually what's happening? And because we started maybe half an hour ago, we were talking about actually substantially quite a poor set of leadership models, either in politics or in business. There are not that many exemplary leaders. I mean, there are amazing people like Gandhi or Mandela, but actually they are once in a lifetime personalities. And I think there's something really interesting in local leaders, okay, i.e., the person that you work with or for, because that's actually people's lived experience of leadership is the people they work with. It isn't working with Gandhi or Mandela or Obama, who without
they're charismatic leaders, aren't they?
but they're
There's a
not
lot of
necessarily our lived experience.
Yeah, I agree. And we want charismatic leaders, but there ain't many charismatic leaders around. And unfortunately, charismatic leaders. What is leadership first? I think the good question is getting a team or individuals to do something not necessarily in their best interest. That's how their immediate best interest. So you're getting to people where to do stuff that maybe they wouldn't do by themselves. So a charismatic leader doesn't necessarily mean they're the right. So, the president of Russia must be a leader, mustn't he? Must be a good leader and have some charisma. Our favourite, Boris Johnson, wow, charismatic. Jeremy Clarkson, he's, drove me nuts like many people, but you can't help but like him. He's revolutionised how people see farming, and that's a lot to encoding and recoding model of communication, isn't it? We spend a lot of time. So one of we don't follow theories through completely. So there's this encoding and recoding, encoding, transmission, and recoding. So most people, in a marketing sense, understand encoding the message to your people and then transmitting it through, LinkedIn or Instagram or verbally or whatever. But we never do the recoding. We never do the bit with how did the audience actually hear the message. Right? So I've given them the message. I'm really chuffed about it. I've got it over to them. But how did they hear the message? And I think that so no one was bothered about the post office scandal. It's a brilliant model, isn't it, for everything, for decades. And then a TV program with a script writers who encoded it for their audience, and then we have the decoding is a public inquiry, an award taken off someone, and possibly jail sentences, and an absolute outrage from everyone, just because of a bit of clever encoding and understanding how people were going to receive that.
And I think that's really interesting because, again, I'm just giving context, so I don't want to make any political commentary, but recently Rishi Sunak came back from Remembrance Day, D-Day event a little early. And there was consternation about this. And I remember listening to the media who turned around and said, well, we knew it was a story, but we didn't know if it had legs. But it turns out it has legs. And I was really interested in the way the media sometimes don't know whether something's got legs. Another famous example will be the Make List's interview with Prince Andrew, of course.
Yeah.
And you knew that it was an important interview, but you had no idea what the consequences might be. And I find that quite interesting, that there is an ebb and flow. And if you do a particular thing at a certain time, maybe nobody will notice. And then you do it at another time, and then suddenly it's front page. And it's interesting, that element of whether it's timing, whether it's fortune, or maybe it's context. I mean, you use the phrase encoding and decoding. I think timing and a sense of where you're launching your vessel out into, the tide, the current, the way things are going.
Yeah, I think the Brits. I'm involved at the moment with a political campaign in the UK, just as a sounding board and advising strategy and all this sort of stuff, to help our candidate win. And the middle ground, you're Brit from whatever ethnic diversity, you're Brit. What we've all been brought up with is a steady contentment with fairness. All we want is a fair chance. The majority in the middle, fair chance, fair go at it, fair opportunity, fair healthcare, everything, and what we see is fair. So if you can push that trigger, that chord of unfairness, and that's what that program pushed, was it clanged loud and clear that this isn't what we signed up for as a society. We don't want. We forgive mistakes. We are very forgiving. Mistakes are forgivable, but as soon as someone starts being unfair, it really hurts us culturally. And so as damaging as the D-Day thing may be, it's probably going to be the betting on the date when people know they knew the date and they bet on it, and you're like, hang on, well, how can I trust them? How's that fair? I can't do that. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's more damaging, unbelievably. It's almost like a committee sat down and said, how are we going to absolutely muck this up? Right, let's leave D-Day early. Let's all get caught with their fingers in the pie. How you communicate. What works? That was the question, wasn't it? Why are we outraged by some things and not another?
And it's really interesting. We are straying into products here, but I, Rishi Sunak is definitely a competent young man. He's intelligent. Um, he knows how to make money. And he's had the type of education most of us would die for. So he's not dumb. And yet that competence has not
No,
secured him much, has it, really?
no.
I think I wonder if it's a particularly British trait because you talk about fairness, and I agree with what you say. But of course, is it a particularly British trait to be a champion for the underdog?
No, well, we will never know because I'm not, unfortunately. God, I'd like to have some Irish or some European. Oh, sorry, is that into politics? But if I could get a passport in another place, I'd be be very happy. We won't know, do we? We do think that we're the sort of like champions of fairness, don't we? Unlikely.
Mhm.
I have the nasty feeling that the Scandies are probably more in that area. I did read a really interesting book on charity and how charitable we are if we consider you deserving.
Mhm.
So this psychologist divided it into deserving and undeserving poor. So if you're deserving and you're apologetic about it, we give you the shirt off their back and everything. But if you're not, then we don't believe that you should be helped, sort of thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it is a British trait. Um,
But we've
I think
almost
a
gone
lot of
full
people
circle
just
here. We're slightly disagreeing with ourselves because we talk about the sense of fairness being really important. I've speculated the idea of championing the underdog is particularly important. But of course, we talked earlier about a whole series of miscarriages, either of justice or of fairness or of transparency, etc. So empirically, perhaps we'd like to think we are, but the evidence suggests we're not.
no, and it hits us to the quick. I think this is why it really threatens their whole social thing. In we're the bad guys. Mitchell and Webb have done a very famous skit, haven't they? Where the two back into Nazis because they're such extremes, aren't they? But but where the two Nazis are like, are we the bad guys? Yeah, and I think if you look into the British Empire, we think we're all about sort of trains and good education and stopping some brutal practices on a local level. But were we the good and cricket, of course, and all this sort of thing, or were we the lesser of two evils?
Hmm.
I know we banned slavery, but ultimately we were the ones that probably industrialised it and made it as effective as it was. When we banned slavery, it always makes me laugh that we reimbursed the slave owners, not the slaves. Did you know we borrowed money to do that? The government borrowed money in 1820s, would it be?
It is
So
really interesting because that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about how morals, ethics, and morals arguably shift. I mean, there's a strong argument that says they shouldn't shift, but equally, we only have to look at history and says they do. I mean, it's only relatively recently that we gave women the right to vote, that we recognised racism, that we've recognised
yeah,
different genders, etc. So whatever moral compass we currently have, it's not the one that we've always had. I mean, that's absolutely for certain, and I think that's interesting.
we're back to a philosopher, aren't we? Is it Hegel or Hegel principles? Theses, antithesis, and synonym, i.e., you have a thesis, a way of doing something. Someone has a different opinion. You argue about it, blend it, and come out with a new way of doing. So hopefully, we're always on a lovely upward curve. As humanity, we have a few backward steps, don't we? But in principle, even the horrors of the Ukrainian war, they're investigating war crimes and saying you're going to be this will come to an end at some point. This is horrible, and you will be held accountable. So on that step of that sort of things are going in a slightly upward direction. Let's hope, it continues. But yeah, I like that the objective have things. Where's the fairness in it? And I do enjoy the fact that we borrowed money as a country to pay slave owners, recompense them for their loss, and we didn't stop paying that loan back until the 80s. I'm sure someone in the audience might know this, but I think it was the 80s we stopped paying that back, and of course we would have been paying that back through income tax. So if you were a descendant of a slave owner paying income tax in the 70s or 80s, you would have been recompensing the owner. That's a strange thing historically, isn't it?
And it is interesting because one of the things we talked earlier about is the idea of mavericks and trust and outliers and challenge and systems. And one of the really interesting things is the way systems look after themselves, whether it's the economy or the politics. The system tries to be self-sustaining, and there is so we have in the past, and it's kind of changing a little bit at the moment, tended to pathologize everything that isn't normal. Okay, well, our first challenge is how do you define normal? Okay, and then anything that doesn't meet your criteria is abnormal, and therefore we then end up classifying, categorizing, pathologizing people. And of course, this is incredibly problematic when it comes to neurodiversity, EDI, etc. But when you're talking about the past there, drapetomania was a phrase coined, I think, around about 1700, which is for the cognitive malfunction of people no longer wanting to be slaves. If you didn't
Yes.
want to be a slave, you must be ill. There must be something wrong with you. And I think it's really interesting. We live in a world where we do pathologize things and stick labels on them. And I find that really interesting. In some respects, people like a diagnosis. In other respects, the classification and categorization of people or beliefs or even genders can be deeply divisive. And I find that whole thing about the definition of normal and what is or is not acceptable or what gets a label and we embrace because we enjoy that label or we reject because it's a them and us.
Yeah, and it is leadership, and it almost all comes down to leadership, because if the leader in the group goes, hey, come on, let's, they seem good fun. Everyone's like, oh, okay then, and you go off and wow, these are good. I mean, that's another of being old, and I don't find divisivity. Every culture I've come across has been welcoming, and wanting to show you themselves at their best. They pretty much all got the same aspirations as us. You want your family to do better than you have done. You want to be proud of your family and your country, yeah, and you're pretty much happy with your lot. You know, Brenny Brown is great, isn't she? And everyone knows the vulnerability one, but I was watching one last night where she was talking about if you dull the emotions, which people do, either by not viewing echo chamber content, by that I mean everyone agreeing with you, or drugs, or drink, or any extreme, I guess, of sport or whatever. But if you dull your emotions, then you dull all emotions. So if you dull disappointment and anger and all these sort of things, you dull them, then you also dull excitement and love and all these sort of things. And you cannot possibly know the good times unless you've known the bad times. It's not possible, because what have you got to measure it against? So I think life is for living,
Mhm.
and you surround yourself with the right people, I guess, is another one, and try to influence your environment. It's too easy to go, oh, that was something I came across, one of those thought experiments. You might enjoy this because I know you're a sailor. It struck me, I'd heard I think it was a Hebrew thought for the day. Occasionally, you pick it up on that, and it was a thought for the day, and it was talking about if you throw all the evil out of your home, that if you don't keep focus, it will come back 5 times worse.
Mm.
So if it's not an end. You haven't won. You can't stop. It's like we get when we thought we had, didn't we? In that lovely period of, say, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the peace dividend, we thought we'd sorted it, didn't we, as a world, and then rudely we haven't. And I think it's because you keep your hands off. You take your hands. Strangely, it is a phrase, hands off the tiller. So it suddenly started me thinking about sailing like a Hobie cat. So sailing the Hobie cat, to get it to go in the right direction, is hard work. Physically, you've got to fight and feel and adjust and tinker and fiddle, and just the moment you've got it perfect, it's no longer perfect, and you've got to tinker and fiddle and everything again. And the other big point I was going to say is, if you let go of the tiller, it will turn into the wind.
Mm.
So if you don't keep the pressure on, going in the right direction, that's my point. I think, if I'm not rambling too much, it's hard work to go in the right direction, and it takes some pain and a lot of skill and some talent and a lot of capability. But as soon as you let go, as soon as you relax, it will turn into the wind and maybe capsize if you're unlucky in the wrong wind conditions. So, yeah, I thought that was quite a good analogy.
I love that analogy, and so I'm going to use that with you as we sort of draw to a close. What are the things that keep you on, dare I say it, the straight and narrow? What are you focused on when your hand is on the tiller? Where are you going?
Cognitive dissonance in I physically. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because I don't think I've been. The first point is I'm not completely. So I'm as frail as everyone else and made a lot of mistakes. Would like to think I've learned from. Hope I won't make mistakes again. A certain part of your audience might know. I know him. He's done some real clangers, dropped some real clangers. I'd like to think that I've tried to recover those and do my best, and it wasn't. How do I keep myself on the straight and narrow? I think there's at the moment, what would Jesus have done sort of thing. I'm a fan of Modern Family, the sitcom. If no one's watching it, have you watched it?
Yeah.
Yeah, what would Phil do? Is what I. That's where that character, that personality, his resilience, his kindness, his desire to get involved in everything. He's just like so. So I do have I do literally. I'm not kidding here. I do think, what would Phil do?
Oh, well, I think that's a great note on which to end, and I may even splice in a little clip of Phil Dunphy, because I think he's a great character. I think you are too, and this has been a fantastic conversation. Clive, thank you very much indeed.
No, thank you, Tim. It has been a great conversation.